Are we all sitting comfortably? Then I shall begin. It's funny that, because I was just thinking about current events, and I was thinking back to being a kid, and I was looking at programs. I remember being a kid and actually sitting down, Watch with Mother, I think it was called, which probably shows you my age, but there you go. I'll introduce myself as I come through the slide, but I specialize in blood chemistry analysis. And if it's in blood, there is secrets in there. Everything about your health and well-being can be found in there. So whatever you're experiencing, whatever you're going through, hopefully you should be able to interpret and visualize within a blood chemistry analysis. What I'm about to show you is what you don't see and what doesn't get seen in current medical paradigms of looking at testing. So mind and mood disorders, I've tried to specialize this. Now, before I go further, I'm afraid to say I'm quite technical, because predominantly what I do is I work with professional therapists, and they then take the blood work that we do and they interpret it. So, for example, for people who aren't professionals and that want to get blood work done, I have somebody like Charlotte who's sitting there that does work with me, that I'm working with, mentoring, teaching, training, and supporting to interpret this. If you want to see what's happening in your body in a way that you have never seen before, that, dare I say, if you go to your GP, who won't be able to run and can't run half the things that we put in there, more than half actually, then this is the place to be. So about me, I'm Jonathan Cohen. I'm the founder director of Functional Diagnostics, or Functional DX. I've been in clinical practice for over 30 years, currently in nutrition as a nutritional medicine practitioner, or what was called a nutritional therapist. I'm been a director and treasurer of BANT, which was the British Association for Applied Nutrition and Nutritional Therapy. Name's changed a bit and I forget what all the acronyms mean. I have my own clinic, which I sadly don't get much chance to do nowadays, Centre for Applied Nutrition. And I've specialised in complex and chronic conditions, the things that get away, the things where you go to the doctor time and time again and say, I just don't feel right, nothing wrong with you. I don't feel right, nothing wrong with you. And there is something wrong, but you need to take a step aside and see what's going on. I've worked with conditions like Lyme disease and ME and cancer, multiple chemical sensitivities, various other things. In fact, every time people come to me, it's always chronic, it's always complex, because otherwise the easy fix would be to take a little white pill, tiny little thing, swallow it, and hopefully it all goes away, because that's the idea of pharmaceuticals. Now, it doesn't really matter. If it works, great. I'm not going to stand here and say you don't use them, because everything has its place in time. And in acute care medicine, you want something to fix you quickly, but if it's complex and chronic, it's more than that. It's like an onion. There's layer upon layer upon layer that's taken anything from 10, 20, 30 years or more to build up. And what we want is fix it now. And there is no such thing as a quick fix. If you're lucky, there is, and if you're not, you've got to work at it. And it's about working together. You know, you find your therapist, you're working with your therapist, and between the two of you, you're a partnership. And when the therapist says jump, you say how high. And if you can't jump as high as they want, you come to an agreement of how high you can jump and work your way forward. My background is not just in science. I mean, I came to this when I turned 50. I should have done it 20 years earlier, but then probably wouldn't be the kind of person I was now. And when I left school, I guess I should have followed, into my father's footsteps. He was a GP, and my brother's now a doctor, consultant somewhere in Bristol, and I've got other members of the family that are doctors, but I didn't. I went down another path, and had I gone down that path, I wouldn't be standing here today, because I'd have become part of the establishment following that, because that's all you know, that's what you're trained in. You have to follow nice guidelines. If you don't work in that field anymore, they kick you out. So, I know there's a lot of talk about, oh, doctors know nothing, etc., etc., etc. It's just the way that it is. It's the way that they're trained, what they need to do. And of course, a couple of slides in time, I'll talk about the time they get to work with you. I've also spent a lot of time and taught all over the world. I mean, energy medicine, you name it, I've probably done it, including massage and aromatherapy and things I haven't even got a name for. I've seen the weird and wonderful things I can't explain. And no, I wasn't going mad, but there is another side of this whole aspect of what we consider physical. I have a slide in there to talk about this because you can't differentiate. This is really important in terms of health and well-being. NLP incorporates into my practice, has done for years and years and years, simply because you have to be able to communicate. Communication is everything, and that's the most important aspect of being able to get a message out there. And how many times do we have when we talk to people and we say X, Y, Z, and they look at you and they don't get it? So, a good therapist should go, if I don't understand what the client's trying to tell me, I should try a different approach. It's like the Muhammad coming to the mountain and the mountain coming to Muhammad. Essential, different forms of communication. As an aside, I always think it's absurd. You go to school, and one of the things they don't teach you is how to communicate. I've thought about this for 35, 40 years or so since I started doing NLP. I wonder when I went to school, no one told me how I should interact with children. You're just thrown together into a playground and now communicate. And when you get miscommunication, people learn bad habits of communication. They learn bad behaviors. There's no, and yet you can teach communication. You can teach people to say things like, what is it that I did? As opposed to, why did you do that? Why give people the chance to elaborate and all fanciful, what? Be precise. Language should be precise. We should be talking to each other in ways that are precise. That's another story. So today's today's talk is how you can identify hidden drivers of mental disorders, emotional disorders through functional blood testing. Now, with functional DX, now I stand here and I say to you, declaration of interest. Functional DX is pretty much my company. I set it up, I run it. It's there for a reason. One, to provide a service, and two, not necessarily in that order, is to try and make it a profitable and successful venture, unashamedly so. So when I stand up here and I talk about things from a functional DX perspective, not that I have a hidden agenda, but this is what I do, and that is my declaration of interest. What I want is to uncover full body responses so you get clear direction, what to do, how to do it. It may be that what is being experienced, although it's being experienced and represented in that way, might be down to a simple physiological disorder. And by physiological, I mean something in the body. Something's not quite right. It might be high cholesterol, for example, which is caused by something else. But then when you've got a situation going on, and I will repeat this, you worry. And when you worry, and then you get into that, and then you're in this loop. And when you can't get helped, it doesn't help, because then you can start feeling isolated, alone, etc. And these things build up, and then they get represented in other systems of the body, which exacerbates the problem and the feelings. This is not a deep dive into biomarkers and chemistry. There will be some of this here. I apologize if some of it goes waltzing over your head. It went waltzing over mine for years. But I will try and simplify it as I go through. If there are burning questions, and I mean burning, and they can't be held, then just stick your hand up or whatever, and I'll try and go through them. Otherwise, we'll try and do a Q&A at the end. It's quite a big presentation. This may take time. If you get bored, put your hand and say, it's boring, okay, then I'll try and make it more interactive and enjoyable. So, I'm going to tell you that mind, body, and spirit are intertwined and cannot, should not ever be split apart. You can't have one without the other. Everything comes together. Holism, holistic. You've heard this term, holistic. The whole. I mean, you know, HOLO, holistic, we call it WHO, whole. You know, there's more to us than what you see. We know that because you can't see what goes on in somebody's head. It's not like represented out there unless you happen to be a very trained spiritual person who can actually tap into energy fields or whatever and get indications. And of course, you've got the spiritual side. And that, by that, I don't mean running off to a place of worship on a Sunday or a Saturday or whatever. I'm talking about that indescribable, indefinable aspect that goes on. We need to have that. So I remember Charlotte just talking before about something, and I was thinking, you know, there's something called blue zones about people. This was about interaction, about having community. And you know, one of the things about people who live the longest on the planet, they live in places called blue zones. These blue zones are places where there is community, where the elders of the community interact with the younger members of the community, children, and that keeps them young and alive. And these people, like in Sardinia, walk up mountains at God knows what age. They bounce up the mountains and they look after the kids or whatever. They live long and healthy. And it's more than just what they eat, much more than that. It is about that whole aspect of involvement, community, spiritual size of things. But things can be represented physically in blood, and that's the first place to go. Blood does not lie. I want you to remember that, hold that in your minds there. Heal the body, heal the mind, heal the mind, heal the body, etc., vice versa. And use functional DX, because there is nothing out there, nothing, I swear to you, nothing out there here, apart from the USA where my current co-partner exists with his technology, which we use here, that does blood interpretation in this way. So let's go on. So revolution, yes, I've been trying to create this revolution. I don't know, a revolution should happen overnight. I mean, God, if 8 years or 7 years is a revolution, overnight revolution, and I'm still fighting to get the message out there, I'm kind of worried that I'll be pushing 80, you know, and suddenly say, oh, overnight success. And I'll be going, oh, why didn't it happen 20 years ago? But blood tells a story from mild inflammation to chronic illnesses and serious diseases. You know, one of the things I really think about what I do here is I prefer to think of it, yes, okay, we are all suffering from societal illness. All of us, you know. Breathe the air, you know. I don't know, does this classify as inner city around here? I mean, I suppose so, to some extent. But, you know, petrol fumes, exhaust fumes, diesel fumes, you know, toxins in everything that we touch, taste, eat, microplastics are everywhere, has an effect on us. So, you know, these are represented in what we present in terms of blood. We want to believe we're healthy. What we can do is take a chance on that, but we can stop what's going to happen. Okay, you might not be able to roll back the clock from where you are now to some extent, but what we can do is stop the progression, and that is preventative. This is the most preventative and best preventative analysis system that there is. Now, I'm making a lot of claims here. So we're trying to revolutionize blood testing and technology. It's more accurate. We believe it's more accessible, and it's the only one available so far. So what is functional blood chemistry analysis? It is the process by which comprehensive biomarkers, so I assume everybody understands what a biomarker is. I mean, you've had a blood test, they say sodium, potassium, cholesterol. These are all biomarkers. There's lots more. I mean, I have something like 257 now, at the last count on, that we could possibly look up in our system. But it's the way in which they're organized, analyzed, and interpreted to provide a comprehensive assessment of the state of the body systems, as well as nutrient status, and trends to and away from clinical dysfunction. Nobody wants to be clinically ill. If you're clinically ill, don't come and see me. Go start off with your GP. You know, somebody come and presents to me with numbers all over the place. I say, no, You know, you have to go to your GP acute care, and if that doesn't work, then we come back into the system and see what we can do. And that's a proper and appropriate way to do things. So this is one particular test we do. It's a brain check test. I'll talk more about this as we go through. But it's just biomarker after biomarker after biomarker. And every one of those tells a story. I could spend a day easily going through each one of them and talking about them as a snapshot, but then you would all be running outside for coffee or whatever. So, but interestingly, I mean, you know, I think Charlotte was talking about acidity, alkalinity. You know, I mean, electrolytes can tell me that story. They can tell me if there's too acid, and if it's too acid, it's, you know, it's a trend into metabolic acidosis. If it's too alkaline, it's a trend into metabolic alkalosis. But each one of those is going to have a different effect on the body. And what's interesting, she mentioned about meditation. And one of the things that happens in meditation, you sit down, you know, if you want to be traditional and you want to hold whatever mudra and do whatever, then all you need to do is breathe. Most people, when they're sitting down in meditation, don't sit down and breathe. Doesn't done. They sit there, mouths are closed, and they're breathing in through their nose. It's building up carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide increases, it does something called the Bohr shift, basic biology. And as you build up carbon dioxide, you actually shift more oxygen into the system. You shift more oxygen, you get better delivery around the system. And when you've got more oxygen, your mitochondria, these are the powerhouses in the cells, work better. You get better energy being produced, and so on and so forth. Of course, relaxation does help. That's the mitigation of stress. There's some interesting biomarkers that can show stress, not only physical stress, but emotional stress. I should say that we do look at hormones, cortisol and other sex hormones, etc. All of these have a part to play. And as I go through the systems in a little later on, you'll see how these can be affected to an overall representation. Full iron panel, seriously important to look at iron markers in the body. There is a relationship between something like iron and copper, for example. Lack of copper or excess copper, which is very rare, but lack of copper can lead to dysfunction, neurological dysfunction. But I don't know, I have never, ever, ever had a test from a doctor that's ever looked at that. Never. They've never looked at ceruloplasmin, which, interestingly, is the protein that carries copper around the body. Now, iron and copper dance together. They do this fandango. I mean, there is another element involved in there, but they dance this dance all the time. It is this balance that goes on, this dance. And the protein that carries copper around the body is actually a ferrous oxidase. It's an iron-based compound that carries copper around. So they dance together. And actually, if we looked at the mitochondria and we looked at how energy is produced through the body, you'll see that certain parts of that require iron and they also require copper. And so this balance goes on. And all of our health and all of our well-being depends on balance. It's always about balance. There is a word called homeostasis, and that literally means same state, homeo, same, stasis, state. It means that our body's working 24/7 to keep a balance, to make sure our body temperatures remain the same, to make sure that the alkalinity in our body is at a certain pH value so the enzymes can work, etc. And when it goes out, we go out. And we know it doesn't require much. You see, in the old days when temperatures were like 98.6 or 98.7 degrees Fahrenheit, and you suddenly had a temperature of 99, you go, oh God, I feel awful. It's 0.2 of a degree Fahrenheit. I mean, for goodness sake, if this room temperature changed by 0.2 of a degree Fahrenheit, you wouldn't notice it. But inside your body, these are changing. When you get up to 100, you notice it. You know, and then it goes on, then you've got a raging temperature, and then there is something like an infection going on. But as you can see from these slides, that's a lot of biomarkers. So you think back to the blood tests that you may have had. You think and look at those, if you ever get to see them, of course, which they don't. Usually they go, yeah, everything's fine, nothing to worry about. But if you looked at it, you'd see, 20 items on a page and go, everything's okay. Well, yeah, right. When you're looking at 100 plus, that's a lot. And then you've got to take them and combine them into systems. And then the systems have got to be combined into more systems, and so on and so forth, to create these algorithms, which is what we have done. And then magic happens. Then the invisible becomes visible. And then you've got something to work with. So, let's go on more into functional DX. I mean, whole body testing requires comprehensive markers, not just a few. You can look at a few and you can go, well, I think this could be happening. But yes, this is how I started. I used to look at the results that when I first started learning functional blood chemistry, when there was no AI, when we didn't have any computing to help pull all these algorithms, I did it by hand. And oh my goodness me, I used to spend 2.5, 3 hours. This was just on what I got from the NHS tests. And I got a headache, and I had all lines going everywhere. I mean, this was mind mapping gone mad. And when I came to speak to my clients, I went, I can't remember what it was doing in the first place. But however, this is what I think. Now, I have a computerization system and algorithms to help me. And then we're looking at optimal ranges. And by optimal, we know there are clinical ranges. If you fall outside of the clinical range, so in other words, if I fall outside of where this blob of metal is on the floor, I am clinically too high. The doctors will go, clinically too high. Maybe we should look at that, definitely. I want you to look at, give me something to bring it down. Or if I walk all the way over to here and I fall outside of this area here, I'm now clinically too low. However, there is a place right in the middle where, let's call it this little screen is here, where you want to be. That, as a model, as a rule of thumb, that's where you want to be, that's optimal. And when you fall between optimal, and you fall inside of the ranges, the high and the low, you want to see where you're going. And this will tell me where you're trending to. See, so I'm not looking at saying, oh yes, you're okay, because there are two paradigms in the medical profession. You're either sick, and if you're not sick, you're healthy. Well, I tell you, ranges change. I'm seeing it now, ranges change. And when they look at a populace that are sick, and they do a statistical analysis of it, they go, oh, wow, look at that, we'll change the ranges. So they push this bar further over there, and all the people that were out there now inside, so the old sick have now become the new healthy, they're okay. This is nuts, absolutely nuts. And I've seen it with inflammatory markers, where they've gone for people of a certain age, and this is a biggest lab a private lab in the country where they did this, they changed what's called the ESR, which is the erythrocyte sedimentation rate, which is just a measure of how many millimeters in an hour your blood will drop, your red cells will drop down in water. And they changed it from 20 millimeters in an hour if you were over the age of 40, to over 40. In other words, everyone over the age of 40, or whatever it is, are suddenly inflamed, but no, they're not anymore. Now they're okay, because this is the norm. It's to be expected. Well, if you accept that premise, if you accept that you're going to be told that that's what it is and that's what you've got to expect and put up with it, and you're going to suffer from X, Y, and Z, great, that's up to you. Me, no. There's a statistic that says when you get to a certain age, the last 15 years of your life, of average or so, you live in ill health. This is statistics. This is that's what's there. People are on medications. The medications are on, produces more medications because the first lot of medications have side effects, etc. And they're not well. They're unhealthy. They're inflamed. And inflammation is bad. Inflammation is what we definitely don't want. And so as you look around the room here with all these bits and pieces, so much of this is, perfect for producing an anti-inflammatory response in your body. The gentleman who was asking about sunflower oils earlier, I mean, sunflower oil, when it's heated, has a low boiling point, low smoking point. And so what happens is not only is it bad for you, but when that cools down again, as the bonds reform, instead of forming again like that, they form like that, it becomes a trans fat. And trans fats don't fit in anywhere. They cause negativity. They're so bad it causes inflammation. And when you get oils which have been kept and not stored properly, they oxidize and they become pro-oxidant. And think of having something of metal. Let's imagine you were made of metal. Do you want to rust? Because that's essentially what is happening. That's what rust is. It's about iron oxidizing, and it's fast. And you can take one piece of metal, put it outside, you look in a day later, and rust has spread all over it. It's the same principle when you take a piece of paper like this, and I take a match, and I light it, and I put it on here, and the whole paper catches light. That's the same principle that's going on there. That's high energy electron transference, and that is oxidation. So blood holds the key to a healthier future. End of. Not negotiable. I'm telling you, believe me. We have blood panels to suit everything that you basically want to. They're panels for different things. Say, I'm worried about aging. Great, okay. We've got a fantastic test for that. Before somebody starts asking me about pricing and everything else, I don't discuss pricing. These are for professionals. However, you can look at ranges anything from £149 upwards. If you just did finger prick testing, which I don't advise, just to assess things, obviously the prices are less. I think they're better to see assessment of how well you're doing. Except in one case, if you just wanted to do your vitamin D levels, for example. Essential, everybody's vitamin D needs to be assessed. You need to know what your vitamin D levels are. It's the only connection, really, that we have with the sun. Everything else, pretty much on the planet, except for us, has a connection to the sun. Plants have a connection to the sun. In fact, we eat plants, which is one of the things we eat. We're actually eating photons. Photonic energy. Different colors represent different storage of different wavelengths of light. If it's yellow, then you're in the yellow spectrum. Curcumin, sort of yellow, and you think about where that fits into the spectrum. If you're eating berries and fruits and whatever, they tend to be polyphenols. They're in the darker end. They're in the purple range. If you really want to equate them to chakras and whatever, then I have to talk to you about every color has an opposite. So what you might think is purple could be green, and green could be purple, etc. But that's the opposite ends of the scale, and that's a different talk altogether. So all sorts of finger prick tests available, and we just launched a while ago our non-centrifuge tests. So with centrifuging, it means that you've got to get your bloods drawn, you've got to go to somewhere specific where they can spin them around and take all the clear serum out of there, and then put it into a separate bottle and send it off. That keeps blood stable. Now we've got a range of tests, but it takes out a lot of the other biomarkers, but it's cut down, which doesn't need that. Take the blood, venous draw is gold standard, end of story. It goes off to the lab, and it doesn't need centrifuging. Always got to be in the lab by midday the next day. So range of those. We look at 13 body systems, actually more now, accessory systems, 7 or so of those, the macro systems, nutrient statuses, and clinic. We also professionally look at potential clinical dysfunctions. In other words, the common ones where you're trending to, is there hyperchlorhydria? Is there a viral infection there? And it's interesting because you can look at white cell counts and analysis of these, and when you look at these conventionally, you can see a normal level of white cells, but the distribution, this is so important, of how the white cells are being distributed, indicates that your body's producing enough white cells. The trouble is they're in the wrong proportions, they're in the wrong percentages. And I'm seeing this, and I got to say this here, and I'll say it again through the lecture. I have been looking and investigating since 2020, since COVID came into place, since I got it back in March, I think 2020, and I came within that gnat's whisker of, actually going into hospital there. I got it. It was horrible. Not that I was really ill, it's just that I couldn't breathe. Yeah, I wish I'd never started smoking all those years ago. I haven't smoked in years, but there you go. My lungs, my respiratory function is less than optimal for sure, and it's my weak point, and that's where I get hit first. I then started doing blood testing. I started looking at seeing the blood biomarkers going on, and there were some very strange events going on. And then vaccinations came into play, and I'm still looking at all the blood biomarkers. And all I'm going to say on this, because I'm not going to try not to get drawn into the pro against vaccination, but it doesn't matter, COVID-19, spike protein antibody. I'm looking at blood work today, and I can see that it's abnormal. What I'm seeing, it just doesn't look right. I'm seeing distributions of white cells. It's like everybody's immune system is on high alert and is remaining on high alert. That can't be good because energy gets transferred to the immune system first. I mean, if you've got invaders at the gate, you're not going to say, you're not going to push all your defenses against the gate being breached. What you want to do is stop the gate being breached. And so your immune system is activated. Now, I'll give you an idea what this means in terms of energy, and I am digressing because I do. But a fully activated immune system, particularly for somebody who's got something really seriously wrong, for example, cancer, 2,500 kilocalories of energy go into that immune system, that fight. Now, your resting metabolic basal rate, just for being alive, lying still, and keeping everything going, pump, 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 and whatever working, anything between, depending on your age, anything between 12 and 1,600 kilocalories of energy a day. That means up to 4,000 kilocalories of energy a day of expenditure of energy. Well, hang on a second. When you eat during the day, eating 4,000 kilocalories of energy to refill what you've just expended is like massive amount of food. But you're sick, and digestion requires energy. And you don't want to eat. So what happens is you get into a state of catabolism. Okay, you start to lose muscle mass. In cancer cachexia, they call it. You start to eat, your body eats the muscle because that's a cheap source of amino acids, breakdown of protein. Protein digestion is essential. So we'll move on. Now, for example, here, I'm not sure that you can see that well here, but sorry? Okay, so when we look at a result here, if it says 13 body systems here, it'll list the body systems up, and it will give me and you a percentage here. In other words, how much attention do we need to apply to the immune system? 100%. In other words, the immune system is looking dysfunctional. Ka-ching, let's do something for it. As a therapist, as a person looking at that, you want to go, okay, what foods do I eat? What supplements should I take? What lifestyle changes can I make? What can I do to improve that? The same with thyroid and sex hormone function and GI function, i.e., the whole digestive process, etc. And the rationale for each one of those systems is provided here. Why is the immune system showing up with 100% need? Because we looked at all of these biomarkers here. That's what we looked at. That's what was in the test. The more you've got, the more you can look at, the more certain you can become. If there was only one of them, you go, I don't know about the others, but all of these were either higher or lower from an optimal perspective. That tells us we should look at it. The same with thyroid. And when we look at the accessory systems, we're looking at acid-base. Why are we looking at acid-base? Because we want to see about the balance between acidity and alkalinity in the body. pH, essential. Inflammation, everything wrong has got an inflammatory component. The biggest thing you can do for your bodies is think anti-inflammatory. Think about what foods can I do that's anti-inflammatory. Meditation is anti-inflammatory. Massage is anti-inflammatory. You've got everyone here who's a specialist in their areas will tell you what they do is anti-inflammatory. Why cause inflammation? The the sunflower oil in its wrong state is inflammatory. So don't take it because you get inflammation. Inflammation breeds inflammation. Now the immune system is activated because that's what it does. It's your defense. It's a very big, wide-ranging system. What are the lipids like? Cholesterol and triglycerides, etc. How toxic? And then we look at vitamin status. And when we look at vitamin status, it may not mean that we actually have measured the state of glutathione. It's a very tricky one to measure, by the way. But looking at the biomarkers, we can say there is a functional need for glutathione because certain of the markers that might be represented in the sulfation pathway suggest that that's what's required. How are your electrolytes? You know, are you drinking lots of water, but are you getting rid of the electrolytes out the body? Why is potassium so important? Why is sodium important? Sodium, potassium dance together all the way through the body. You have this pump, sodium-potassium pump that goes on. It's how nerve signals are transmitted down through the nerves. So, you know, potassium out, sodium in, potassium out, etc. You know, then we bring calcium and magnesium into play. All of these minerals are in a balance. You want to know they're in a balance. And then we represent it, nutrient needs. Why do we need zinc? Really important question. Obviously, zinc is essential for the immune system. Zinc has a really strong relationship with magnesium. And magnesium has a really strong relationship with B6. And vitamin B6 is very important for the production of neurotransmitters. And neurotransmitters, the ones that we want to be conversant with, serotonin and dopamine. Well, St. John's wort is a serotonin-related herb that encourages, you know, serotonin levels. But then you could be on SSRIs, for example, you know, which are serotonin inhibitor materials that doctors like to present. I'll talk more about that. And GABA. The relationship between glutamate and GABA, for example, requires B6. You need to convert glutamate to GABA. You need vitamin B6. Really important. It has a great part to play. Interesting, we know that dark green leafy vegetables have got lots of folate or folic acid in it. But folic acid, I can't remember the full name, goes something like 5,7-ptero blah, 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 glutamic acid in there. It's full of glutamate. If you can't digest it properly, see, digestion's critical, that's where you get a buildup of glutamate. If you've got genetic SNPs that run through your profiling, then you can't digest that properly. And then it sits and it pools, and then it becomes a neuroexcitor. It's not good for you. But if you've got B6, you can convert the glutamate or enhance the conversion of glutamate to GABA. And GABA is really relaxing, you know, sort of like a chill out neurotransmitter, etc. Whoops, gone a bit quick. For the professional, a whole raft of 40-odd different dysfunctions we'd look at and say, oh, yes, hypochlorhydria, low hydrochloride, is there a possibility of intestinal parasites? Never underestimate gut health. Never underestimate the balance between gut and brain. So coming back to that, something else that was mentioned about meditation, a lot of people go into meditation and they chant, they go om. Well, that om and that hum and whatever is stimulating the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve is all about relaxation. It's about sympathetic system and parasympathetic system. So, you know, you're always balancing this. However, the relationship between calcium and phosphorus in here, I can tell you, if I see it high or low, I can say to you that your sympathetic nervous system is in dominance or your parasympathetic nervous system is in dominance. Yeah, magic. Who ever look at that? When did anybody else of a professional nature say, oh, look at that, and by the way, now if you do this, that, the other, we can bring that back into balance. It may take time, but you know what? It's worth the investment. It's worth the time. So we have two reports. We have one report for the patient, one report for the professional. You know, see if this works. That one there, isn't it? No, it won't show on the screen. Down here says optimal. You want to be an optimal. That's where you'd like to be. I'd like to see an optimal. I've never seen anybody with 100% record on here. I rarely see people with anything above 60 because we're always going in and out all the time. That's homeostasis. When we go here, when we go above standard, we go into the clinical area. You don't want to be in that. This is telling me that my fasting glucose, because I do fasting testing, is too high. Why is it too high? This is the question I ask. Too high from my perspective. I look at the long-term measurements of glucose, which is the glycated hemoglobin, which simply says that this is the amount of glucose attached over the life of a red cell, 120 days. Too high. Therefore, the average amount of glucose going into the body is too high. Hence, we need to look at what's causing that. And that could be stress, it could be pathogens, etc. So we have 2 reports. And now I've got through the preamble. I'll talk a bit more. Look, medically unexplained symptoms. This is you going to the doctor and saying, I don't feel well, I don't feel great. People do it. Are common, accounting for up to 45% of all GP visits. I'm not making this up. This comes from nhs.uk. This comes off of the NHS website themselves. And up to half of new visits to hospital clinics, when people go into, I just don't feel well, I don't feel myself, half of them, okay, are medically unexplicable. So they say chronic fatigue, irritable bowel, fibromyalgia, pain all around the body. They're labeled to take all the things you don't know, put them under a label and put it that way. So what often happens in doctor surgeries, when people keep walking in with the same complaint over and over and over again, there was a term that used to be called heart sink. So when a patient walked in and they started doing this, it was literally their hearts would sink. And that's how they were labeled as heart sink patients. I know I had somebody who was doing research, qualitative research on this, and he told that to us, and I thought I was shocked. I want to know why. Where's the cause? What's the cause? What can we do? And it's easy. It's not rocket science when you know how. Simple. There's an old story that when I first did NLP, I remember reading, and it was taught to me, and I'm sure it's been around a while. A plumber goes to a house, and there's a really complicated boiler system in there, and the owner calls him in and says, it's not working. And the guy looks at it, and he ponders, and he walks around, and he looks at it again, and he gets a hammer out of his tool bag, and he goes, smack, and it starts working. And he gives the guy a bill. For, at that time, I think it was $10,000 for making it work. And the guy went, Anglo-Saxon, 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 I'm not paying you that. All you did was go, bong, like that. I want a bill that reflects what you did, the amount of time you had. So the guy got upset, he said, okay. So he came back 20 minutes later with a new bill. And it said, for using my hammer to give the machine a good smack on where it should go, $10. For knowing where to smack with my hammer, $9,909. So it is about knowing where. This is not rocket science. This is facts. All you need to know is where to put it. And what you want is someone to tell you. And if you haven't got the oomph or the abilities or know whatever, you want something to tell you. This is where it is, apply the pressure in the right place. And then it's easy. The rest is up to you. Are you going to comply? Can you comply? What do you need? Where do you get the support from? Because that's the key, isn't it? Like picking up a guitar. You just need somebody, unless you're exceptionally gifted, which I'm not, and my ears don't work that well, but if I had somebody to show me what to do and to work with me, to help me, then I can play a bit, and then I can get to where I want to get to. It may take longer than somebody who is gifted, but that's the way it goes. Now, doctors, they've got 9.5 minutes. In fact, this is a state effect. Now, you walk into your GP surgery, you sit down, that's now 7 minutes after they said hello, whatever. What do you expect them to? Their hands are tied. They've got to interact with you, take a case history, they've got to diagnose, they've got to interpret. And when we're looking at here, these are the diseases of civilization. This is what we see. Fibromyalgia, heart disease, gastric response, acidity, coming back, chronic fatigue, cancer, diabetes, depression, obesity, arthritis, all of these systems show. This is the health iceberg. You see the 10% that are above. That's it. 90% of the iceberg is below water. So when you think you're just going to slide past an iceberg, well, think again. That 90%, it's way out there. You want to give it a really wide berth. But look, it's the gut, it's toxins, it's negative emotions, inflammation, neurotransmitters, digestion, all of these things. But you want to identify what are submerged. So I've mentioned about normal versus optimal to you. Literally, optimal is where we want to be. Anything outside of that, but that's not in the clinical area, is functionally high or functionally low. What we want to do is regain function to get closer back in towards this area here, fall outside, fall into the hands of the system. Or you try not to fall into the hands of the system. And you can't do this. The current medical model cannot help but create more anxiety and mental health issues because the paradigm of defining normal or clinical sick individuals keeps repeating fruitless visits to their GP. As I said, heart sink, heart sink, heart sink, I don't feel well. So what do? They end up on medications which, may have some effect, but I don't think it's necessary. For subclinical issues like thyroid issues. And what do they end up on? SSRIs, which I call knock 'em out candy. When in doubt, you're stressed, you're hyper anxious, have some SSRIs. This will help you feel good. Okay? And so you end up with a society that's medicated. And getting off those drugs is not the simplest thing to do. It's a slow, difficult process that requires support. So this is a little comment here. This was from a thyroid presentation. This poor woman sitting there flat on the floor. Okay? The good news is, her doctor says, your test indicates that you're in the normal range. In other words, it hasn't fallen outside into the clinical. Okay? Because it's in there, when doctors get tests back, they look at it, they rely on, they've got 7 minutes, 9.5 minutes. So look at the test results, talk to you, and they look at it and they rely on the lab telling them there's something dysfunctional. Well, that's clinical. Well, if there is nothing dysfunctional to put in there, they can say, hands on heart, oh no, we haven't been told there's anything wrong. Tell you what, it's all normal, good news, you're okay. Well, that doesn't look like a normal person, but I don't feel well. Oh, I feel like that. Have some of this, it'll make you feel better. So I look at all the terms, I went through all the terms of definitions for mood and anxiety and all of these neurological disorders. Depression, bipolar, anxiety. We're fantastic as a race of people. We're wonderful at creating labels. Well, I don't believe people are butterflies and they should be stuck on a wall with a pin through them with a little sign under there saying depressed, bipolar, or whatever it is. I don't believe that because you are creating, not me, you, whoever is doing it is creating people who are going to live up to their label. You get labeled as something, you live up to it. Label a child with that. You create a child that's going to carry that baggage into the future. We are not butterflies. Well, we are all butterflies. We just don't need to be stuck on a pinboard, and labeled as genus this, and we're all in this bracket here. We shouldn't be. We don't need to be. And so it goes on. And this was Mind's list. There are 34 on here. That's a lot of disorders. A lot. Phobias, PTSD, OCD, hypomania. Do you know what? OCD, for example, that could be as a result of poor diet, methylation, which I can talk about. It could be a relation to that. Guess what? Abraham Hoffa treated people with vitamin B12 or stopped people having excess vitamin B12 and dealing with schizophrenia. Guess what? It was successful. Well, hang on a second, that's vitamin B. That's not some complex drug that the pharmaceutical industry have produced, where they're making a shed load of money out of it, and promoting it through to doctors. These are things that could be done. Lifestyle, diet, food, supplements, good therapists or good people to help you get through it. Dementia, Alzheimer's. These are on the rise. Is there links between everything that's going on in society and these? Absolutely. Dementia diagnosis up by 56%. Hang on. Is it because we're suddenly more aware of it, therefore we label it more? Or is it because there is societal disease, there is societal influences that are driving issues in our brains, in our neurophysiology to push this up? I mean, out of mental health, the portion, Alzheimer's, 50 to 75%. Vascular dementia, 20%, etc. Same roots, ubiquitous results, many expressions. And by same roots, I mean the 90% hidden under the water, all causing that issue. Okay, what are they? Oxidative stress, toxins, metals, microbes, i.e. bugs, pathogens, disease, causing agents, gut health, oral health, stress. They all lead in one inflammator, they all lead to one place. Neurodegenerative diseases. I mean, they all lead to other diseases as well, but I'm here talking about neurodegenerative. I mean, take this out and I put something else in its place and I can switch this presentation around and I make it fit anything else because the same root causes are at the same root causes for all our ill health of society. How am I doing so far? Are you still with me? Yeah, great. Okay, so neurodegenerative diseases, umbrella term for a range of conditions which primarily affect the neurons in the brain, the nerve cells in the brain. So Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, motor neuron, etc. None of them are nice. Are they all avoidable? I will go out on a limb here. I am being recorded, so damn it all. I'll go out on a limb. If there is a genetic propensity to some of these diseases, that is your genes, being able to express. And if the conditions are right to trigger those genes to express, then that can happen. But if somebody does not have a genetic propensity to that, and they get that, it must have been caused by something else. A burning question? Okay, you're on fire. Go ahead.
Okay, so I had someone very, very close to me who's passed away from sporadic CKD.
Sporadic?
Sporadic Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease.
Okay.
CKD, it's a prion disease.
Yeah.
And it's not been familial because we've had the blood tested.
Mm.
So in that type of a situation, would it be an outside trigger as opposed to, obviously, familial factors?
More than likely, something caused it. It wasn't born with it. So if you're not born with it, and 5 years before you didn't have it, and then you do have it, the question you have to ask yourself is what caused it? Yeah. Okay, that requires investigation. I don't know. Did anyone used to watch a program called House? House, the doctor. Yeah, he was in America. I've forgotten his name. Anyway, he and his team would investigate what caused it in front of it, and it always come up with the absurd or fantastic answer by the end of the program. That's how it would be. But they investigated the root cause. I think you should be looking for root causes. If you've got it, it may be too difficult, too entrenched to totally get rid of it. But can you stop the progression of? And I've had clients with ALS, for example, and I've had to say, look, I know you want a cure. I'm not God. I don't know whether that can be. I'd love it to happen because, listen, I have an ego, and nothing will give me greater pleasure to go, aha. But the reality is, can I stop the progression? Can I get better quality of what you've got? And that's how I look at it. Something caused it. And I'm thinking of one particular client in particular who I have not had that much success with, but I can see the triggers there, and they're pathogenic. The bugs are there. And if you think about what the disease that you just mentioned, and you think about it related back in time to what, mad cow disease? You remember?
So that's the variant form. Yeah.
I know it's a variant. Yeah. It's a variant, but it's still prion related now. But that was caused by pathogens. There was a disease. Well, why shouldn't that be for humans? But if, when you get somebody with that, they're out of, they're into another area. They're into the medical model. They're into the system. And you have to rely on the system to do what you think could do, but they will decide for themselves what they do. I have my own ways of working, but the problem is, and it is, look, private testing and identifying health is not without cost. It's money well spent. And if you ask me, you can't take it with you. And your health is the most important asset you can have. There's no point having everything else in life and not having health. Health is wealth. End of. Okay, that's it. And if you haven't got it, find it. Crowdfund. That's what I would do. The UK's number one killer. Okay, first of all, when COVID was around, suddenly COVID became the number one killer. Okay, not going to argue with statistics at the time of doing this, and anybody who died had COVID. And then they stopped doing that, and then they went back, and then suddenly, with March or so, July 2021, COVID disease deaths were down to number 9, and dementia and Alzheimer and ischemic heart diseases, and basically lung cancers and everything were back. They were back on top again. They never went away. It's just how things are reported. In the words of David Lloyd George, there are lies, damn lies, and there are statistics. He was a well-respected politician. Not my words, his. But you can make numbers tell anything you want. So I stand up here, and I can make all the numbers I have tell anything I want. But I'm trying to tell you what I see and what I know, because I don't have a pharmaceutical company out there backing me. So let's look here at root causes, okay? So we're going to go through some of the root causes. I've mentioned inflammation, right? So a Western dietary pattern, your diet, okay? Think of what they eat and how they eat it. Every time a client comes and sees me, they always go, oh yeah, I eat healthy. I haven't had anyone come in and say to me, oh, actually, I did a couple of people. No, it's usually the parents of children who are not necessarily children. They might be 21 or 30 years old and say, their diet is rubbish. But according to them, the actual client itself, no, my diet's healthy. I eat healthy. And you think, define healthy. I mean, this is a really complex and difficult thing to do. But Western dietary patterns, this predominantly, think of the American disease, which is even worse, it shows an increased risk of mental health problems, including depressive symptoms in adolescence, through biologically plausible pathways of adiposity and inflammation. Adiposity, do as I say, don't do as I do, I should say, by the way. But adiposity, this fat around the middle, look, I mean, the older you get, it tends to build up. I should be doing more about it. But, as I push towards 70, I'm starting to get this fat around the middle. This fat is an endocrine, in other words, a hormone-producing organ all of its own. And what's it shoveling out into my body? But estrogen. Inflammatory estrogen. So I am pushing inflammation around my body. A way around it, of course, is to do some exercise, which I need to find time to do, etc., etc. So I could put all these excuses out, and I could be my own worst client. But there you go. But it doesn't matter. It becomes inflammatory. And inflammatory, does it sound like the word fire to you? If something is inflammable, means what? Breathe on it, put a match near it, and what? Woof. That's what goes on in your body. You remember what I said to you about here with the piece of paper with the match going on today, and suddenly this spread of fire across here, high energy electron transfer, that's fire. Rust, that's kind of like fire. And that's what inflammatory is, and that's what's going on in your body. And when you get all this inflammation flying through your body, you want something to put out the fire. You want to quench it. This is why antioxidants are so good. In the right balance, of course, everything in the right balance. So inflammation, stress, anxiety, depression, leaky gut, autoimmune brain fog all comes and creates inflammation, or inflammation causes all of those. What comes first, chicken or the egg? Root causes, heavy metals, chemicals, too much salt, heat, trauma, mold, fungi, candida, comes under mold and fungi and yeast. You do not want candida getting out of control, because candida will depress the innate immune system. The immune system you're born with is called the innate immune system. When bugs and everything get in, you don't want anything. You want that to fire up. Candida has an amazing ability to switch it off. Every time I've done something with people with Lyme or whatever, Candida up there. Okay, so not only that's an issue, but bacteria, parasites, and Lyme, the Borrelia organism, does something else. It switches off the acquired immunity. So when you've got Lyme disease or Borrelia or borreliosis, and you've got Candida together, the immune system is basically quietened. Viruses will have a go at macrophage activating factors. GC-MAF, for example, they just cut off all the little sugar molecules, and your defense system's walking around blind. It could bump into a virus, and the virus goes, "Hey, man, how you doing? Who are you? Don't know you." But if it's got these little sugar molecules attached and haven't been cut off, it will go and engulf them. Macrophages are cool. They're really important. But that's what happens in the immune system. This is why you need all the balances. And then we come down to pathological and emotional spirit, yelling, abuse, isolation, abandonment, PTSD, all of those things also have an effect on inflammation. In other words, society, producing an environment, I don't know, you're at work and you're really told off, for whatever it is you're doing, or you're constantly put down, they're setting you on fire. We do that to each other. We don't realize what we're doing. I've had, my children are grown up, but, did I ever shout and yell and whatever? Yep. Did I do things that I didn't know that I should have done, etc.? Well, there were limits, but hopefully not too much. And they've recovered. I mean, they're both doing way better, at their jobs than I have. I should earn that kind of money, but there you go. So I must have done something right or been involved in that. But, if you think about society or you think about environments where that goes on and on and on, you are creating unhealthy people, and we are all heading that way. And some of us, we can't do anything about it. So inflammation. Mental health was associated with low-grade inflammation. This is from a particular study. Lifestyles explain the association with depressive symptoms. Platelet distribution width, that's a biomarker, okay, was positively associated. In other words, if the platelet distribution width goes up as a percentage, then, so inflammation goes up. Neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio. Oh my goodness me, this is such, I know the NHS uses this because during COVID, there was a program that they did on immunity. And I recorded it. Went out of my way to record it because I went, oh, this is great. And what they did is they took a group of people and they looked at their neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio. So in white cells, you've got white cells, and then the majority of those should be neutrophils, and then as a highest percentage, then come lymphocytes. Lymphocytes deliver the B cells, the antibodies around the body, and then you've got monocytes, eosinophils and basophils. Well, the neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio is associated with inflammation. Every single one of the 6 or 7 people they had on there had a neutrophil lymphocyte ratio above 4. I mean, the clinical level is 3. But there was 4, and the program's going, oh, that's all right, 4. And they said, good news to the people who were like 6 or 7 when they did the test again. It went down to 5. Oh, yes, you're doing great. And I'm kind of going, they're inflamed as hell. You want to get on and do something about this. And I was shocked. And I kept this, and I have a recording of this, which I put out in another lecture. And I just go, I see neutrophil lymphocyte ratio at the moment out there somewhere. I mean, God, I just had somebody recently at 10. 10? I mean, it's like, I'm going, what? Never seen one that high. And they're perfectly normal, but this is the changes that are going on inside our body. Inflammation, it could be bacterial, it could be activated immune system, but it could be all of those things. Low-grade inflammation predicts persistence of depressive systems. In other words, if you've got depression or whatever and it's going on and on and on, you know, there is inflammation. I know, let's not try using a little pill that might help. Why don't we use some lifestyle intervention, an anti-inflammatory program, anti-inflammatory foods, anti-inflammatory attitudes and lifestyle, and guess what? Maybe, in fact, I won't say maybe, I'll say the chances are weighted in feeling better and it's perfectly natural. So with FDX, I mean, we show inflammation, we talk about why. I mean, the biomarkers considered, now this is really interesting. It may not mean an awful lot to those who aren't professionals, but things like uric acid, fibrinogen, homocysteine, sodium to potassium ratios, cholesterol, lots of cholesterol, all the lipids, ferritin, ESR, that's erythrocyte sedimentation rate, which I mentioned to you earlier, C-reactive protein, red cell distribution width, I just mentioned that a minute ago, vitamin D, all of those, and loads more, get considered as an algorithm. And depending on how high or how low they are, depends on how much you want to interject with an anti-inflammatory program. Get the inflammation down, the body then's not having to fight with the immune system so much. Now there's more energy available. You know, have you ever tried to feel, happy, when you're full and bouncing, full of energy and beans? Doesn't go together. Usually people who are not feeling as great or happy or, emotionally up there, are flat energetically. So we look at things like C-reactive protein. I mean, homocysteine is increasing. Now, all of these inflammatory markers, guess what system they're also associated with? Come on, somebody have a guess. One system in the body, one organ, big organ that has to work all day, every day. Liver? Heart. No, the liver is pretty self-righting. But when the liver goes out, you're in big trouble because it's obviously for detoxification. But the heart, cardiovascular system, all those markers, you'll see it in the cardiovascular system because an upset cardiovascular system is all about inflammation. Remember that little slide I said? It's all about inflammation. Inflammation is the number one, numero uno. Fibrinogen is about clotting. This LP-PLA2 is known as plaque. I mean, that's basically whether there's any enzyme being produced from deposition of arterial plaque. Why is ferritin so high? Look at this person here. It's 553 nanograms per mil. That's a lot of ferritin. Ferritin is an iron-storing protein. Do you want loads of iron? No, because, iron is a reductive metal. And the more iron you've got, the more reduction capacity you've got, which is what's happening with all of this high energy transfer, and it's way high. It's also an acute phase reactor. So in other words, a higher ferritin goes, then it's telling me that there is oxidative stress. Hang on, there's a new word for you, oxidative stress. Remember this, because stress does not have to be emotional. It could be physiological, it could be exogenous, i.e. from outside, and it can be endogenous, i.e. inside. So you've got bugs, you've got anything else going on inside you, if that's not right, it's creating a stress response. And that stress response may not be anything as big as, I don't know, you're outside and a car is hurtling towards you, all of a sudden, massive stress response and whoosh, cortisol being released and, adrenaline, etc. But if you've got that on a drip by drip basis and it's not controlled, then over time, that cup, you've seen a glass of water that makes a meniscus and you get one drop too much on there, whoosh, over the side it goes. And it's takes out from in there, and that's a big response. And that's what can happen. So dealing with stress is essential. Now, the best way to deal with stress, obviously, is to get rid of the thing that's causing the stress. But on the other hand, another best way to deal with stress is handle it. And if you want to handle it, you want to get your body strong enough to handle it so it can laugh in the face of stress. You can't get me. So we have all of these biomarkers here, but ferritin is high and we need to bring it down. And that says stress and pathogens, and it usually responds, first of all, to something like viruses. Viruses will kick it off big time. C-reactive protein is a protein. Inflammation is associated with long-term changes in brain function, etc. Adults more than 60 years old with elevated CRP markers express poorer verbal memory consolidation and smaller left medial temporal lobes. In other words, remember I said to you before about ranges and as you get older and how they're changing them and more inflamed you become as you get older. ESR, I've spoke about earlier. ESR indicates inflammation. I have observed, it's not in any book, I put it into the system because observation, and I'm dealing with optimal, and I can decide to some extent what I consider to be optimal, but I have seen ESRs of low ESRs of 2 and 1, I see them represented when there are viral and bacterial and yeast and mold patterns. And whenever I see anything of 2 and 1, I go pathogens, bugs. And and let me make a point here. So I have a project and part of the project is called the Tripod of Health. And it's about, there are 3 things that affect us. 3, only 3. 1, genetics. Sperm meets egg. That moment of conception. The die is cast. That's it. That can't be changed. No one can change that. They can't change your genetic profile and makeup. 2, environment. If you are not genetically or able to deal with the environment that you find yourself in, for example, supposing you can't climb the tree and the tiger is around prowling, your lunch, that's it, your supper, probably lunch, dinner and snacker for a day or so, that's it. However, if you can climb the tree, you're pretty much safe. And the third thing is bugs. Well, guess what? You're walking soup, your lunch for pathogens and bugs. They will eat you from the inside out, given the chance. You're full of nutrients. You're full of beautiful amino acids. Listen, people die, they get buried in the ground. The worms move in, the worms move out. You turn into all that's left as bones. Nature takes over. You get recycled. It's all about recycling, but your lunch. And they will eat you. And the first thing that bugs go for is iron. They want to eat you. Iron. That's what they want. Iron and glucose. So we always look at the glucose patterns, and we always look at the sugar patterns, and we always look at that. And I just don't look at one glucose marker. I like to look at glucose and glycated hemoglobin, the long-term one. I like to look at the 2 hormones that control your glucose. That's C-peptide and insulin, fasting insulin. They're really important. And then maybe fructosamine as well. And I like to look at that. And if I see an aberrant pattern there, I'm looking for the bugs immediately, and they are there. So, those are the 3 things. Well, on top of that, if you think of that as a stool, the seat on top is what I call energy. And if you don't have energy, guess what? You die, because nothing works. So you need energy. And if energy production is impaired, you're in big trouble. Now, when I was doing biology at school, there was something called, when we had to learn about the representation of life, there was something called Mrs. Nerg or Mering, movement, excretion, respiration, irritability, nutrition, growth, etc. And the E stood for energy. Well, I think that's wrong. I think it should be E, and everything else requires energy to function. So energy is key. God, if you like, in this. And if you don't have energy, you can't do anything. Things shut down, you feel rubbish, that's it, ends of story. So it's all about the production of energy. Fibrinogen is another thing for clotting. The more inflamed you become, the more fibrinogen goes up. But a load of those biomarkers you don't see on a conventional blood test. You just don't see it. They're not run. They're considered not necessary to run. They can be classified as too expensive. You don't get enough money invested in you to run a comprehensive blood test, because your doctor may turn around to the lab and say, I want to see T3. This is the active form of thyroid hormone. So triiodothyronine. We all know about T4 and thyroxine, but yeah, great. You want to see what T3 levels are like. And if the lab considers it not necessary, they won't run it. They'll make the decision for the doctor. There you go, that's the way it goes. So sometimes their hands are tied. I feel sorry for them. So what comes first? It's a conundrum. Mental illness can cause physical symptoms. So Are aches and pains caused by mental states, or mental states causing aches and pains? This was just a little thing I found from a woman's report on the internet. When I started university, I was constantly ill, and doctor after doctor told me my fatigue and flu-like symptoms were down to anxiety. Oh, knock-em-out candy, remember I mentioned that? You know, heart sink patients. No blood tests were run. Well, that's unfortunate, but she's at university, and you know, who pays much attention if you're 18 years old at university? In hindsight, my increased anxieties were probably partially responsible for my constant illness, but other factors were responsible too. When they did a blood test, when she did one, and she tested her thyroid functionality, found out she had an autoimmune thyroid condition called Hashimoto's. In other words, thyroid peroxidase antibodies and thyroglobulin antibodies were elevated. Okay, and one of the symptoms of thyroid dysfunction and having a thyroid dysfunction is simply that, mood, low mood. But then what did I say? What's the thyroid all about? The thyroid is all about the key to, it's the gasoline for the car. T3 is the active form. That goes into the cells start working like mad, that's producing energy. But if you don't have energy, how do you feel? And when you feel everything else stops working. And when you don't have enough energy, things stop working. And then this goes down and that goes down, etc. Is this making sense? You're beginning to see this pattern here of wanting to look at the bigger picture. There's no point looking at, I don't know, there's a little spot. Imagine we're like this pipe here, this central heating thing here. And it starts leaking here because that valve is under pressure. Imagine that valve is down to the fact that the boiler pressure is too high. But what you do is you get a plumber and he wraps some tape around, it stops leaking. But does it deal with the pressure? No. What happens is it'll find a weak spot somewhere else where the pressure is high, and that will go. And so you're running around putting out fires. Wouldn't it be better to deal with the boiler? Deal with the cause right from the get-go. Remember that guy, 9,909, knowing where to apply. So what comes first, chicken or chicken eggs? Is it symptoms or pathology? This is the bit I really like. So mental disorders increase risk for communicable and non-communicable diseases and contribute to unintentional and intentional injury. Many health conditions increase the risk for that. So in other words, if you're sick, you're not going to feel great. Well, I know when my children were young and they didn't feel well, irascible, grumpy, irritable. I know when my dog's sick, he just lies there and goes. So, why should human beings be any different? And this is where I say mind, body, and spirit are intertwined. Okay, so balance cannot be achieved permanently. I want this message to get over. I've thought about this long and hard, that if you don't establish healing on all three levels, then you're not going to get, in effect, a long-term healing state. In other words, that if we fix the body, but we don't fix what's going on with the mind as well, or we don't fix the mind, we do try and work on the mind without looking at what's going on in the body, are we going to get healing intertwined? Do people need something spiritual? And I don't mean of a religious nature, I mean spiritual, something that satisfies the spirit. It's almost indescribable, but it's something that gives something special. You look at something and it just gives you the oomph. It might be growing flowers, I don't know. You grow a particular, your love is to grow geraniums, because I can see some out there, that working with nature. So all of those things together. And I think we need to work as an integrative team. The patient, the therapist team, everyone together to produce a program that for people that works for them. There's no health without mental health. 14% of global disease has been attributed to neuropsychiatric disorders. They say it's probably been underestimated because of the inadequate appreciation of the connectiveness between mental illness and other health conditions. So I'm going to fairly run through this quickly. I don't know, what is the time?
12:46.
How much time have I got? I could do another hour, but everyone's desperate to get a massage. Go on.
It's up to you.
Okay, well, am I going fast enough for you, or shall I speed it up?
Speed up.
Yeah. I've got lunch soon. Is everyone hungry?
It's fascinating, but I'm a bit hungry.
Yeah,
It's fascinating.
Okay, so, well, first of all, I'll skip through some of these, okay? But stress, okay, this is really important. I've mentioned it here. So indicators of stress. 1, ferritin, oxidative stress, mentioned, yes? Tick. Clump. DHL and cortisol tells you about the adrenal cortex, where these hormones are produced. Adrenals, energy. So have I got the concept of energy over how important it is? Yes? Yes, great. Okay. Sex hormone binding globulin. If it's too high, I see it high a lot. That's the hormone that binds up testosterone and carries estrogen. They carry sex hormones around the body. Why is it important if it's high? Because you might have normal sex hormones, but if you have your SHBG is too high, which can be a factor of stress, it will bind everything up. Will you get the benefits off of it? So if you've got a declining testosterone level, you know, for a change toward men, you know, that I seem to have more in this room than I usually get. So testosterone, libido, sexual function, erectile dysfunction, all the things that men think about because they're hot-wired, you know, to operate through their gonads. You know, that's where their brains are. You know, that's just it. You know, if you've got that all tied up, if your SHBG is too high and it's all tied up, guess what? You're not going to get the benefit of it. A libido goes down. If libido goes down and functionality goes down, men don't feel very happy about it, you know. They don't feel very happy about losing their hair, I can attest to. But particularly when it comes to that. For women, it's also equally important that, you know, testosterone obviously produced in women is less, but they still need a decent amount of it because libido is important. You know, sexual function is important, you know, for humanity, for their sake. You know, it's about being, to an extent, to be able to create pleasure. You know, there are functions associated with this. Then we've got things like sodium and potassium. Now, if sodium-potassium ratio is too high, that's acute stress. If it's too low, it is chronic stress. There's a ratio between the two. They could be perfectly balanced, but they're not balanced enough. When we look at calcium and phosphorus, below is sympathetic dominance. Yeah, the sympathetic nervous system is dominant. Okay, that means stress, like everything, is wired up. If it's too high, parasympathetic. Now you're into a state of congestion because you are secreting. So physical versus emotional stress. There are two kinds, you know, physical stress, we can then go into the stress, and then you've also got endogenous, which is internal stress. But let's have a look here. If we've got a relationship between cortisol and creatine kinase. Creatine kinase is an enzyme that catalyzes the working of muscle, where you've got creatine, the fuel for muscle, needs to work. Your muscles need the fuel. Creatine kinase works it out. If it's too high, then your muscles are being broken down. Look at it in the relationship to cortisol. If cortisol is normal or perfect, and creatine kinase is high, okay, you're working your body out too hard. Stop exercising. Stop doing to your body what you shouldn't be doing. It's not good. Over-exercising is dangerous and bad, creates stress and exacerbates. You know, that pleasure, that endorphin release is short-term. It's like an addiction. Okay, it's another form of disease there. And so we see creatine kinase elevated, we see cortisol dropping down. But if it's emotional stress, we can see cortisol here is either high and creatine kinase can be normal or low. So if cortisol goes up and creatine kinase is dropping down, okay, then it's emotional. Can the body differentiate between these states? Yes, it certainly can. And you see these, but you rarely see a doctor do creatine kinase in a normal blood test, and you rarely see them, if at all, do cortisol. Why would they? You know, cost money. You know, like homocysteine, really important biomarker, costs lots of money. Vitamin D, I do believe recently doctors have just been told they're only allowed to do one vitamin D test on you a year. If that, that's if you get them to do it. Why? Because of the cost. How much do we pay in national insurance? You know, does it go to the national insurance? Does it all go to, no, you know, the NHS is underfunded, allegedly, you know, it's just all being done wrong in my opinion. However, I'm not in charge. Okay, homocysteine levels. Apart from that, it is a risk for cardiovascular events, okay? It's inflammatory, cardiovascular, inflammatory, occurs in a state of cerebral oxidative stress. Again, all about inflammation, oxidative stress, inflammation. And then we talk about the immune system. So there's a couple of things here that I want to go through as I rush through this. I mentioned about the distribution, okay? What I will tell you is observation for me over the last couple of years, neutrophils up here, lymphocytes down here. I also see globulins generally low. That tells me that the body's immune systems are now insufficient for fighting off things like particularly viral attacks. You know, I'm worried for our society for the future. That's all I have to say. Very worried. Eosinophils usually rise up in the presence of parasites, and parasites don't necessarily mean wriggly worms or amoeba. You know, anything that wants to eat you, that's not your friend, is a parasite. Gives you nothing back. If the three of these are up, usually that's a sign of intestinal parasites. We would want to look at it through a stool test. So next thing, warding off evil spirits, really important. So I love this because commonly called smudging, used for centuries by the Native Americans, favoured the use of sage and cedar. Yes? Anybody here taken smudge sticks and wafted around, do space clearing, a little chanting, a little gong? Came from the Native Americans. You know, they didn't walk around with little bells and go om and chant like that, but it's a cool thing to do for us. However, for earlier dwellers, you know, people with abnormal behaviours would be classified as being possessed. Yeah? The word lunatic, for example, were related to people who, in the presence of a full moon, would start acting crazy. That's where it came from the word lunar. And that was also because of the gravitational fields change in a full moon, blood flows change, it could have an effect on people's expression. You know, and some people just couldn't, they were called lunatics. However, in anyone with tents, and it's not just Native Americans, there's a whole chapter in the Old Testament given over to this, somewhere in Leviticus. But, you know, it's considered as being possessed by evil spirits. Now, I want you to think about this. Mold, candida, and yeast. Okay, been around for thousands and thousands of years. They haven't gone. They're as old as the planet. Okay. Oh yes, here we go. Leviticus 13. You can read all about it there. And no, they're not referring to leprosy. It's actually to yeast and candida effects on the skin, on the body, fungal nails, etc. And candidiasis signs and symptoms include mood disorders, anxiety, depression, irritability, panic attacks, brain fog. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound? I mean, hang on a second. What's an SSRI going to do for somebody with candida issues? Yeah, I don't know. It's not going to get rid of the cause. You know, it's still there. They're still growing. And so, why smudging? Why using cedar? Because thujon, which is a chemical, you know, is found in cedar and sage. You know, that's it. So think about it. You're burning sage, and it smells great. It smells a little bit like grass or cannabis or whatever. Has that kind of aromat. There's a hint there. But however, think about you being in a tent. The tent is a tent. It's fabric, and you get spores sitting in there. You want to kill it. So what you do is you put the smoke up there, carries the essential oils, see, aromatherapy, and it coats in there, kills them off. Kill the environment, breathe it in, etc. Of course, you're not allowed to take thujon internally. Sage, you cannot be taken internally, it can be dangerous. But then things like wormwood, Artemisia, also really anti-parasitic as well, etc. And cedar was like, drawers were lined with cedar to keep to kill all the moths and the things that get in there? Cedar. I mean, it just naturally produces thujon. So there is a link between schizophrenia and yeast infections. Okay, so they did a study. Depression averaged 34 to 44% higher for people in mold-affected buildings than residents of mold-free buildings. Now, I think about Grenfell, and I think they took all the cladding off, and suddenly everyone's going, oh my God, you know, now they've lost all the protection, and everyone's living with terrible damp. Well, not everyone, but there's reports of damp, mold, infection. I mean, it's awful. I mean, just awful. So viruses as well. I could go on talking about Lyme disease and neuropsychiatric decisions. Lyme disease, syphilis is well known for causing dysfunctions, you know, that are neurological. The brain should not have anything cross over it. There is a barrier called the blood-brain barrier. That's it. Everything stays local. It's an island. It's a separate island, but things can cross through it. And they have found that there are things like neurotoxic blood-derived debris cells and microbial pathogens, all associated with inflammatory and immune responses, that get into the brain and cause inflammation in the brain. What I could say to you is there is a big school of thought that talks about sugar levels in the brain, and they could start to call things like dementia, Alzheimer's, type 3 diabetes. So if you want to look at these risks there, you want to get blood sugar under control. It's a scourge of society. It's a really huge problem. Proteins of COVID, SARS-CoV-2, cross there. Herpes simplex, all the herpes viruses can cross over. And now they found that yeast and mold cross over. So here's another thing for you over there. Candida albicans, i.e. the candida that we're talking about, can cause brain infection, memory impairment. So it's not just about eating a healthy diet. Eating a healthy diet is also about keeping these things under control. It's also about you being able, you know, to enhance your immune system and your response to the world in which we live. So blood-brain barrier gets crossed over. Bacterial lipopolysaccharides from their outer coat crossover. It causes the microglia. These are the little cells, some of the cells in the brain. So instead of having little fingers out like that, goes like that. And they then shove out non-stop an inflammatory cytokine called interleukin-6, and they don't switch it off. And it just keeps going, and now you've got this cytokine storm running around the body, and that's so inflammatory. And that's because a bacterial protein went across into the brain did that to protect itself, and out comes the interleukin-6, and it doesn't get switched off, and so you've got inflammation going on. Linked to fibromyalgia. Jared Younger from University of Alabama exactly found this out, and he found a link between that and times of that with lectin as well, which is another story. But I can look into these blood cells, and I can tell you if there's pathogens to be ruled out. So they are linked together. I'm not going to go through what you see in here. The liver is the same thing. Liver and gallbladder. Aluminium, well, be afraid, every day. Aluminium, plentiful, it's all around us. Everything, you know, I see aluminium levels, blocks energy production. It's really common. I won't go through the biochemistry here other than to say it will block in various places on the energy transport chain, 3 of them, 1, 2, and 3, and that stops energy being produced. It also competes with iron as well, so you stop getting iron in, competes with energy. So if your aluminium levels are too high and then they settle in the brain will produce plaque, okay, around it. So, you know, wait a minute, plaque in the brain is often as the brain's protection mechanism, where it locks up things like aluminium, locks up things like Borrelia or Lyme, and stops it in an encoded protein, which is like biological concrete, to save the brain, because you can't get it out. What comes in through the brain often can't be got out through the brain. I mentioned the thyroid before. All I'll say about the thyroid, if your thyroid is subclinical, you don't feel great, if If you don't feel great, you don't have enough energy, you can't get systems to work. If you can't get systems to work, then inflammation, immunity goes down. People with low thyroid, one of the signs and symptoms there is depression, low mood, etc. That's about energy production, and it's about immune function as well. Male hormones and testosterone, I mentioned that. Again, for women, majority of you here, estrogen levels and mental health and progesterone, increasing evidence from in vivo, live brain imaging studies that estrogen modulates cognitive function, cerebral blood flow, and membrane breakdown. Okay, so there's another problem with menopause. So when estrogen levels drop down, not saying that it's good to have high estrogen, high progesterone is really probably more helpful, but when those estrogen levels go plummeting down and women say, I just don't feel, well, of course not, the estrogen levels have gone down. You need to find a way to have that balance. Be thinking about this in advance of of what's going to happen with advancing years. What herbs, what therapies would work with that? And again, I've just mentioned before about sugar management. People with diabetes are twice as likely to have depression. What should we do? Reduce and manage stress. Negates the irregulation of blood glucose. Hormone changes during acute and chronic stress can affect glucose balance. So all of these are shown in an FDX report. It's what we look at, everything. So you can look at that and go, blimey, so this is what's going on. I need to balance this. So we've looked at 9 out of 20 systems. Got another couple of days, I'll go through them all. So, what nutrients do we need? Vitamin D improves anxiety. B12, B6, zinc. All of these things are all to do with something called methylation. Okay, think about, I'm not going to go into the biomechanics of it, let alone histamine, and talk about these elements, but there are certain conditions like pyroluria where you've got methylation essential. And where did he find pyrroles? You don't want pyrroles. ADHD, behavioral studies, autism, depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, post-traumatic stress disorder, Alzheimer's. Even in healthy controls, there was some, 8%. That means it could be triggered at any time. Take-home message, methylation pathway essential. Identify needs for B12, folate, zinc, and B6. Do we get that in a test here? Yes, we do. Am I shamelessly pushing this? Yes. Why? Because you don't get this elsewhere. And if you want to be serious about your health, or you want the message there, you want to think about it, think about a test that suits. Go see Charlotte for it. And these are the pathways which I'm not going to talk about, but we will talk about that in the testing and how the reports are there. At this point, I would have shown you what a whole health report is like, but I won't because we don't have the time and everyone's hungry. So summary. 1, shameless plug-in. Most sophisticated tool to identify the missing pieces in your case, let alone a professional client's case. Find out what's behind the symptoms. It's the best tool for health reporting. And when you've got a therapist who knows, there's a team of people here in back end of my company that supports them. So forget about not being able to read a report. That's not your problem. That's Charlotte's problem or my problem. The report makes it easy. It makes it easy peasy. It's why the doctors who use this, they love it. They always do it because it tells them what to do. Hey, Preston, they charge a lot of money for what they do, but that's their job, I suppose. Anyway, we say test, identify, empower, heal, because that's what's happened. And empower works both ways. Empower the therapist, empower the patient. So blood holds the key to a healthier future. We've got the professional range, a whole range of testing on here. We've got finger prick testing, loads of those. I would not advise people just to want to do them off the bat, because what's the point of seeing what your liver's like if you can't see it in the context of the whole? But if you did a test and you wanted to see if the therapy was working for the liver, you do one of those. And the centrifuge free, which I've mentioned about, there are 5 of those. They are cheaper than the professional range, but extremely great value for money. And we're a team. That's it. Thank you very much. If anyone's got any burning questions, apart from the burning hole in their stomach, let me know now.
Your personal genetic information, how is that safeguarded and where does it go?
I can't hear you. Sorry, son.
Your personal genetic information, how is that safeguarded and where does it go? How is it?
I don't do personal genetic information. If you want a genetic test, there are other companies out there that would get it. You mean if it's like, I will have a genetic test, but not yet. And is the information shared with anybody? No, not the people I would use. 23andMe, on the other hand, as far as I'm aware, and some of the other companies, they share that information anonymously with companies out there, like drug companies. I'm not involved in that. I don't use that.
Okay, but in terms of the information that you get from the individual, that's kind of all safe.
If I was doing it, you did a test through me, the information would be stored and it wouldn't be used and it wouldn't be shared with anybody. It's private data. And if you're necessary and you're really concerned, you would put your name you could put a false name in as far as I'm concerned. I don't really care. That's entirely up to you. A lot of people use 23andMe and they put false data in there just for that reason.
So it's a postal service. How long does it actually take to process them?
Sorry?
It is a postal service, isn't it?
Well, when you let's say, I don't know, you draw your bloods around the corner here, they get centrifuged, put them in spot, take them to the Royal Mail, next day by 1 p.m. to the lab, and takes 15 working days from there maximum. Yeah. You were going to ask me a question about cholesterol.
Oh, yeah. I've got high cholesterol. Obviously, I'm on a statin. I'm sure Charlotte said to me 10 years ago when I first told her in Whole Foods Market, she said, no, it strips your veins as well. And you should take coenzyme Q10. Every nutritionist has told me that. Is that true?
Well, statins.
Is it so expensive? The coenzyme Q10?
Well, I'm really sorry, but it's A, to test for coenzyme Q10 is expensive, and B, the fact that it's expensive is because that's the price of it. However, there are ways to get CoQ10 in multis that I know of that makes it inexpensive. You have to think that cholesterol goes down a pathway, and if the statins block the pathway that produces cholesterol, if you like, or deals with cholesterol, it's the coenzyme reductase enzyme. It gets blocked, and therefore it stops the production. It stops going down that pathway. That's why you need CoQ10. You don't necessarily need it, but statins have their own side effects, and you need to look at it. What you need to look at is either familial cholesterol, but then there are natural ways to reduce it. Like, for example, I can't see if there's anything here, but if you digestive bitters, bitter herbs, dandelion, dill, tulsi, holy basil, that will help reduce that. There's a whole raft of them. Green tea. I saw green tea somewhere. Hey, well, shameless plug for you. There you go, green tea. Green tea is really good. Deals with the adiposity genes as well. And but cholesterol is not my enemy. Cholesterol is an antioxidant. What my enemy is triglycerides. If you're not processing fat, you're not getting fat into beta oxidation to make more energy, because that's you produce 4 times the amount of energy from 1 gram of fat going in through beta oxidation than you do with 1 gram of carbohydrates going into glycolysis. Everything is balanced. So it's not just talking about cholesterol. You see, a doctor's just seeing cholesterol, but they haven't gone, oh, is your gallbladder working properly? Are you digesting fat? You should do a comprehensive test. You owe it to yourself. You're worth it. You can't take your health with you. And there's no point finding out 5 years down the line, well, I wish I'd done that 10 years ago, because you settled in deeper. My take-home message is, you are valuable. You're valuable to your family, to the world around you. Invest a little money into doing a test. It's worth it. That's it. Now, you're going to tell me doing a massage is fantastic. You know, you should have a massage because you relieve, you know, release all the stress in your body. I've just told you what stress does, you know. It works both ways. Anybody else? No? You're all starving? Go eat. Go eat.